with corruption and will set people free for being innocent, and will protect officers who are trying to do their part, their noble part, protecting the whole globe, not only our country, fighting terrorism.
Hossam El-Hamalawi in Cairo. I mean, Hisham Eldin seems to be saying there that much of that information should be protected, because we saw over the weekend people break into the offices of state security. I mean, should the protesters, do you think, have done this? And how dangerous is this likely to be to the general security of Egypt?
Well, I have to respond to a point that Mr. Hisham is raising about counterterrorism. Let's not forget that the militancy that these Islamist groups have embraced came after they were tortured by state security police. The torture that were systematic by agents and that was practiced under interrogations, it's what pushed those young activists into militancy to start with. Secondly, the whole terror scare was exaggerated very much by state security police and by the regime itself in order to justify their own presence and in order to justify the emergency law. I think that the state and the regime are the biggest terrorists actually that we had here in Egypt, and I will not applaud the so-called efforts of the counterterrorism police, which were involved in some of the most gruesome abuses during our dirty war in the 1990s. And yes, I do think that this information should go public. I think any information maybe regarding the private lives of activists, if it was mentioned, those documents should be protected, but any sort of abuse, any name of any agent who dealt with this torturing machine must be exposed publicly.
Theodore Karasik, that's an important point that Hossam El-Hamalawi makes. I mean, what sort of evidence and information do you think is likely to be found of the inner workings of the agency, of possible abuse, particularly against dissidents and organizations like the Muslim Brotherhood, perhaps?
I think this is a treasure trove because any state security apparatus keeps very meticulous notes and so on. I think it's very important to realize that activists had to go into state security buildings and to draw attention to the fact that the records are still there. There needs to be an effort made by the current government to safeguard these documents so that they can be used in the future, but also so that particular records that are relevant to something that is maybe ongoing, like in the counterterrorism fight or something like this, that does not involve torture, but that is in the current period, probably needs to be safeguarded, as well as personal information. So I think this needs to be thought out a little bit. Yeah,
I mean, that's an important point you make, Theodore, because Hisham Safi Eldin in Cairo also underlines that point. I mean, many people will say that the counter-terrorism part of state security perhaps is serving the country well. So should that part of it be preserved in the future, do you think?
Well, I think that there's I mean, this gets into archival research and so on. I think it is important, and I do take the point that a lot of the activists from the 90s and so on were converted because of torture. That's a very good point. However, there's an ongoing effort that needs to be protected. So when approaching these records, it's about which historical period that you want to look at, and up until which date do you want to look at. Do you want to look at it during the 90s or during the 80s, or do you want to bring it up to the current point? And I think that's what the authorities need to think about. How are they going to unravel this and present it?
Okay, Hisham Safi Eldin, I see you nodding your head there. What's your assessment of that? How do you think the documents need to be preserved and analysed going forward?
Well, I will start first by agreeing with this. I mean, if we have to find the root cause, we have to go further than the 80s, even to 70s or even 60s, when this whole started, the mechanism itself started. And this will lead me also to comment on what Mr. Mahalawi just mentioned. I agree on one point, I disagree on another point. I agree that there was torture. I agree that torture is unacceptable under any conditions. But no, I have to differentiate between Muslim Brotherhoods and some activists or the human rights activists that were submitted to torture, and this is absolutely unacceptable. But on the other hand, we have to think Al-Qaeda and Jihad, Talaya al-Fath, Jaish al-Islam, and many other radical and militant groups that I don't think at all that they were doing the right thing. And if he forgot, I can remind him with some of their major issues here, like bombing a school in Masr Jadida, Heliopolis neighborhood. It wasn't such a perfect act to do. Or bombing any other neighborhoods, or bombing Wadi Nil Cafe in Tahrir Square. That was a terrorism. That's something that needs to be fought.
All right, listen, I'm going to bring in back Hossam El-Hamalawi in a second, but Hisham, let me stay with you for a minute because I want to ask you a question about timing and the significance of the timing, because the storming of the security offices came just as the caretaker Prime Minister Ahmed Shafiq resigned. So how significant was the timing of all of this, do you think? Because there are reports that the documents started to be destroyed once Shafiq went.
Now, this is one good question, because I was also attracted to the synchronization. What's going to happen? I mean, the very same synchronization, it's happening again. It happened with the police station, and it's now happening with the state security. I mean, the state security, they had like 25 days or something to destroy all the evidences. Why they started to destroy it yesterday, only when the demonstrators are trying to enter? I mean, they have all time to do this. This is very weird. I mean, there is something wrong. And this information should have been protected from day one again by the Supreme Council, by the judicial system, or even the general prosecutor, the general attorney. He should have done something to do this.
All right, well, let's...
And this will lead to another consequences.
Okay, well, let's bring in...
The consequence, which is the safety, the concerns about safety and security for the officers and the family of the officers as well.
All right, well, let's bring in Hossam El-Hamalawi again, just to talk about that point. I mean, Hossam, is the timing significant here? I mean, it appears that documents started to be destroyed once the former Prime Minister left.
It's not a coincidence. Well, first, we have to be clear. We didn't really know much about what was going on inside those state security facilities following the Friday of Anger, January 28th. And that's when the Interior Ministry pulled its troops off the streets. So maybe actually the destruction of some of those documents had already started by then. But I'm sure that such process accelerated on an unprecedented scale as soon as Prime Minister Shafiq fell. Why? Because state security got totally insecure, and they felt that their protection within the regime circles is being eroded bit by bit. So it's not really a coincidence that we will start getting all of those YouTube videos leaked of documents being burnt, of state security dumping shredded documents like in garbage bins or getting rid of them. It's not a coincidence. They are insecure, they are on the retreat, they know they are being defeated, so hence they are acting in a very desperate manner.
Theodore Karasik, let me bring you back into the discussion here. I want to widen this out a little bit if I can, because according to some of the WikiLeaks cables, Egypt's secret police received training at the FBI facility in Virginia, even as US diplomats compiled